Okay, Dave, thanks for stopping by. First of all, I want everyone who's listening to this realize that we have an interesting character on today. You probably are familiar with the band Blur. Okay, critics called them the Nirvana. Okay, of over. Am I right by that? Like, weren't you like the other Nirvana, Dave?
No, I've never heard that before, but I don't know. We've been called an awful lot of things over our time, so who knows? But nobody's ever mentioned anything to do with Nirvana.
Real okay, but Dave, you don't think like a lot of people kind of when they saw that video came out of song number two, you don't think people kind of had any comparisons that way? You don't like you're kind of like
Oh, maybe, yeah. I suppose that one particular song, yeah, it's not really typical of the Blur canon, I don't think. So if you just knew us by that song, you might think that, yeah, we are that kind of band. But actually, what we do is much more varied than that.
no, you're right. You are. That's probably the song people most know you as, but yeah, you definitely have a wide variety catalog of songs. But also, Dave, I just want people to understand that you started out as a drummer, or actually, that's what people known you as a drummer. But you
Yeah.
also, you have been involved in film and TV, podcasting, a light aircraft pilot, lawyer, former labor counselor, and you still think you haven't done enough.
Yeah, I'm kind of endlessly ambitious, really, which is unfortunate because it means I'm never going to be quite satisfied with whatever it is I'm doing. But it does mean I have an interesting life. My mum once said, I don't know, you've clearly led an exciting life, and I can't argue with that. But yeah, um, I do a big variety of things. I'm very involved with the Labour Party in the UK. I'm a light aeroplane instructor these days. I have worked as a criminal defence lawyer. I've worked as an animator. I've done all kinds of things.
You mentioned that you're part of the Labor Party. When you started out as a band, it seemed that politics was separated from music, right? And today, politics, at least in America, drives everything.
Yeah, it goes through phases in the UK, of being fashionable and unfashionable to talk about music and to talk about politics in your music. Certainly around the time of Billy Bragg, it was very fashionable, and the Manic Street Preachers were big on politics. Blur have never been an overtly political band in our songs, so we're all political people. But yeah, we've been through a crazy time recently in politics in the UK and the US. I think it's only going to get crazier. Personally, I think it will get crazier before it gets better. But things have come to a head, and much of the craziness, certainly in the UK, was driven by the GRU, Russia's, external security services, pumping money into kind of divisive causes and amplifying divisive voices. I think they're otherwise engaged at the moment, so things seem to have gone slightly quieter.
So things are calming down.
Well, temporarily, but personally, I think they'll get better before they get worse. I don't think the far right is done. You only have to look at what's going on in the recent elections in the States to see there's still a vast appetite for those kind of voices and for those kind of conspiracies. In the UK, the conspiracy voices are still loud. They're still parliamentarians kind of willing to be anti-vax and to be pro-Putin, making outlandish statements. They're British MPs, so none of this has gone away quite.
I know it's kind of a almost impossible, probably. It's a hard question because it's maybe irrelevant. But let's say if you started the band Blur today, this is just hypothetical. Do you think if you started the band today, you'd probably more be politically driven?
As a band, you mean the songs?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. because as a band, we're four different people. You know, we don't have one political view. There isn't a blur political stance. Each individual has their own brand of politics, just as everybody does in the world. So, you know, and so I don't think we would ever be that band that campaigns for the Labour Party or campaigns against the Labour Party, or, you know, the Greens or whatever.
It makes sense. So basically what you're saying is the members of your band, they don't share all the exact same worldview.
I doubt you could find any four people that do, to be honest. You could probably find four people that said they do, but you'd have to go into the band willing to subscribe to that kind of thing. Wouldn't it be like joining a political party or something? You'd have to be willing to sign up to a shared political view for that to be sustainable in the long term, I think.
I agree. You know, let's talk about probably something that you're going to be talking about for the rest of your life is the biggest song that your band had, and that became a worldwide smash, is song number 2. Is it true? Did that song come about was based on a record label? Is that right? A music label?
No, not really. I don't know. I've never heard that story. I mean, how it came about was the same way that most songs come about, really. David brought a demo in, and we thrashed it out together. And in the case of that song, we thrashed it out in a rehearsal room. Normally, we just thrash it out in the studio. That was a special one in that everything came together very quickly. Ordinarily, you try ideas and they don't work, and you go up blind alleys, and you know, eventually you manage to steer the thing into the place where it needs to be. Song 2, we all had some ideas coming into the studio, and they all worked straight away. Well, that was unusual. So there's a kind of freshness to the recording because people are just trying out their idea, and it's worked. You know, it's called Song 2 because we had a whiteboard on the studio wall with all of the demos that we were trying to work up into finished recordings, and as you know, there's a row for each song and then a column for each of the jobs we had to do on it. You know, do the drums, do the bass, do the guitars, do the vocals, the backing vocals, and we tick those columns off as we got there. And as the vocals got written, we'd rub off the placeholder name, which was song 1, song 2, song 3, song 4, song 5, and write in the actual song name. Well, song 2 just had Damon's temp vocals on, which they all do. Damon's very good at sort of singing random syllables that sound a bit like words, and he often uses those to base his actual words on. So it's Ude Shini Marvelous Udeling.
Sure.
And when he wrote some words for song 2, we came back to put them on, and it sounded hopeless. Didn't have any of the energy of the original recording. And he just couldn't recapture that spirit, which is often very elusive, that spirit that you get when you've just recorded something for the first time. You're just putting the idea down. It's very exciting. That comes across in the playing and in the singing. So he couldn't get his new vocals to sound any good at all, so he just scrapped it. And so what's on there is by and large the nonsense lyrics of the demo recording. And because they're not, you know, didn't end up being about anything in particular, didn't end up getting a name, it just stayed Song 2. And that is the history of Song 2 in a nutshell. I think he did change some of the individual words, you know, change some of the syllables to make actual words, so it did sound a little more like it was actually English. But by and large, I think it's still gibberish.
Was there ever a thought when you wrote Song 2? I mean, obviously, right? You never knew it would have this magnitude of success, right? You never really kind of counted on that.
I always think they're all going to have that magnitude of success. When we finish every song, it sounds like a hit to me. I'm always gobsmacked that some of them end up on B-sides. It's like unbelievable.
So, okay, well, that's great. So you believe that, like, that's great. I love the confidence. Like, because a lot of artists are like, I could never imagine having this song do, but you're like, no, our music, like, we believe in it. So if you actually knew before Song 2 would have this magnitude of success, like, would you have changed the title of the song? by the way, I love the title of the song 1, song 2. It's unique, it's different. But when it comes to like marketing things, it's like, oh, we need a more memorable song.
Yeah, I think that's true in the States. You know, that our record label in the States at the time tried to get us to change the name of the American release to the Woohoo song, because that's what people were asking for in the record shops, and that's what people were ringing up the radio stations asking for. Can you play the Woohoo song? We, of course, thought that was an unbelievable imposition and dilution of our art, and so we resisted that. We probably have sold 1 million records have we given into that, though. But I don't know, you know, fundamentally you have to do what the song is asking you to do. The song has to be in charge with these things. You can't force it, you know. And as Damon tried to write some lyrics and tried to make it be about something and, you know, be more normal, and it just didn't work at all. So, you know, what works is what you listen to. Fundamentally, people want a song that goes woohoo in the chorus. People want that. Who cares what the verse says? They want it to go woohoo in the chorus. I mean, we've proved that. That's it. If our career achieves nothing, it's simply that. Don't worry about the verse. Just make the chorus go woohoo.
So true. So I mean, listen, when I first heard the song, I figured that would be the name of the song. Now, listen, at that time when you were a band, was it starting out as fun? I mean, I know all bands start out as fun, but were you looking to do it on a professional level, get signed and do world tours? Were you actually looking to do that before all this happened?
Yeah, we were all very, very ambitious, and we still are. So yeah, we all wanted to be stars, absolutely. I think very, very few people get that, are successful, that aren't willing to sacrifice almost everything to get there, because the odds against it are so extraordinary. You know, at the time we were starting out, our record company said there was about 100,000 active bands in the UK at any one time, and I think there's probably more now. So what are the odds that out of that 100,000 bands, you're going to be the one that headlines Glastonbury, you know, plays Madison Square Garden? What are the odds? They're really, really stacked against you, aren't they? So you have to be insanely ambitious, I think, to really get out of the traps and get to the first hurdle.
You know, you mentioned something, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You mentioned that how it's competitive, right? Getting to the level of success that where you are, it's extremely competitive. You know, 1 out of 100,000. Well, today you have like 100,000 songs being uploaded daily, like on Spotify, right?
Yeah.
On the streaming platforms. Does that even make any sense?
Well, there's always been a kind of background noise of music. You know, it's kind of been the bane of the music industry for a long time. How can you find the ones that are worth listening to out of all of the stuff that isn't worth listening to? You know, by worth listening to, I mean it's got some commercial potential. People are going to be prepared to spend money to listen to. That's what the music industry is interested in. Perhaps the artists themselves are interested in something else, but hopefully they are. But that's always been the problem for the industry. You know, that there's been this background noise of music that has no commercial value at all. I think the medium has just changed. That's all. You know, all of these hundreds of thousands of tracks that are being uploaded to Spotify were being sent on cassettes to record label bosses, to A&R people. You know, they were being played at clubs and pubs and bars all over the country. You know, so all of that was still there. It's just all kind of centralized, really. It's kind of the opposite of what we thought the internet was going to do at the dawn of it all. Really, we thought it was going to make the whole industry more democratic and kind of give artists and fans direct contact with each other. But in fact, it's just spawned a whole new generation of middlemen. Spotify being the main offender, but there are plenty of others, you know, who
And also too, maybe you can figure this out. So the music labels generally were basically superstar dependent. They needed a couple of big acts, a couple times a year to really, you know, that's what they would really depend on. Well, these labels are no longer artist dependent, superstar dependent, and yet they're making more money than ever. So how is a business making more money than ever when they're no longer even operating their core business like they did in the past?
Yeah. Well, it's because they're not acting as the labels, you see. There's no one acting as the labels by and large now. The existing labels are still superstar dependent, and not their business model was, let's sign 100 acts. EMI used to sign 100 acts every year across the megalopolis, on the assumption that 4 or 5 of those would break through and go on to recoup, every year. So they were the superstars that they were superstar dependent on, and they would those 4 or 5, they would throw the entire resources of the label behind, kind of forcing them up the career ladder so they could make their money back. The Spotify isn't acting like that. Spotify is acting as if every record shop in the 1990s was suddenly forced to become an HMV affiliate. Every single piece of vinyl, every single CD, every single T-shirt had to be sold through HMV. Well, HMV would have been a very, very rich company indeed, wouldn't they? Or Virgin, or whichever. That's what Spotify have done. They have cornered the streaming market. So now, not whatever label a band is signed to, they have to sell their product through Spotify. Well, no wonder Spotify are getting very rich. And Spotify paying royalties. Sorry, I harp on about Spotify. I know, but they're not the only ones doing this. But they are the market leaders in doing this. The royalties they're paying are far, far worse than even the most the worst kind of dinosaur record label used to sign their artists to. That's another reason they're making loads and loads of money.
Oh, you mean the labels are making more money because of Spotify now, is what you're saying?
No, Spotify are making money because the royalties they pay on their streaming. Remember, they cream a large amount of the profits off the top and feed it through the dividend mechanism to their labels before they have to account to the artists.
Right.
So when you look at what they publish as their royalty rates, you think, well, that looks appalling, but still not as appalling as I thought. But then when you factor in the money they pay out the back door via dividends to their shareholders, who are also the labels, you see, oh right, well that's why.
So how would the labels now make more money? Then how would the big labels make more money off of Spotify than they did before off of the superstar artist? See, here's what I find extremely, extremely confusing. The labels are bolstering more profits now off of streaming from a platform that pays little royalties than they did before selling CDs, which were point of purchase off of superstar albums. I don't understand the economics, how you would make money more now off of streaming that pays less than superstar artists with point of purchase sales.
Streaming pays less to artists, not to record labels. Streaming is set up to benefit the record labels disproportionately, far more than the old record industry model was set up to benefit the record labels disproportionately. The overheads are very low with streaming. Nobody has to print bits of plastic. They don't have to own a massive, great record press. They don't have to own a fleet of trucks to get them to the shops. They don't have to own a shop that takes 50%. All of that is gone. Or, you or I could collaborate on a track after this interview. We could upload it to Spotify, and it would cost us absolutely nothing. And we would have exactly the same access to Spotify's, arguably exactly the same access to Spotify's customer base as EMI would.
Right.
So it's cost us, the overheads are extremely low, and the record labels are getting paid twice. The major labels, this is not the smaller labels. Smaller labels are struggling, but still, because their overheads are low, I think that many are keeping their head above water. I think so the major labels are getting paid twice. They own Spotify stock, and so when Spotify pays a dividend, they get paid. But where does the dividend come from? That comes from the streaming revenues that they're getting in from their subscribers and from their advertisers. That money should be going to the artists, but no, it's going there's a creaming off the top via dividends going directly to the record labels before the process of dividing it, the official process of dividing between artist and record label takes place. So then what's left after the dividends are paid goes to be split up under the terms of the agreements. Spotify have also historically, and who knows if they still do because they sign non-disclosure agreements with all the record labels, have had to pay record labels for access to their catalogues. And I hear rumours that they've had to pay publishers too. Well, again, this is money that's going straight in the labels and publishers' pocket that should have been going to artists. But because it's not for a specific product, it's just for access to a catalogue rather than for access to Song 2 by Blur. It's not attributable to any particular song or any particular recording, and so it's not attributable to any particular artist. So the labels go, thank you very much, I'll have that. Thank you, That's my money. Perfect. Another private jet, please. Oscar, if you could buy me one more of those.
Yeah, no, I think you wrapped it up with that. I think you're right. And are they also making money by literally, from all these other social media companies, like whether it's Facebook or YouTube or TikTok, it's like you pay us and you have access to all our catalog.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a pernicious and particularly awful music industry concept, but one that's been with us since the dawn of time. It's unattributable money that sloshes round the music industry. It's called euphemistically black box money, black box royalties. It's money that's sloshing around that for some reason, by accident or design, or both, usually the rights holder, the rights owner is not able, or the label or the publisher is not able to attribute to a particular artist or a particular song, and so they simply keep it. And the amounts of black box money sloshing around the industry would make your eyes water. Tens, hundreds of millions, maybe as much as £1 billion pounds of black box money gets sloshing around a year, and this is money that musicians should be feeding their families and paying their mortgages with. And there's so little reason why that concept should even exist now. It used to exist because up until the kind of 80s and computerization, everything was done by hand. Companies had whole buildings full of offices with kind of card index systems saying which artists had to be paid on which which song and on which recording. And the collecting societies had similar things. They had people rifling through punch card index system, well, not punch cards, but card index systems. And it was just physically impossible as the industry grew post 60s to actually pay the right amount of money to the right people. It was just impossible. So things like blanket licenses grew up where, for example, in the UK, the BBC would just pay PRS tens of millions of pounds just to be able to use music. PRS would go, okay, thanks very much for that tens of million pounds. Well, who do we pay it to? It's black box money. Very controversial that it was even being received, let alone what they finally ended up doing with it. And, but by and large with the PRS, they gave it to publishers, and the publishers would say, well, we don't know whose it is. Never mind. We'll have that then. Thank you very much. And this was happening for legitimate reasons, perhaps in the 1970s, but there's absolutely no reason why that this should be happening now. It's trivial to find out what songs are being played on the radio and what songs are being sold.
Aren't you like glad that you didn't know all this before you started the band?
Well, I learnt all of this as a result of my band being ripped off. You see, in the very early days of my band, our manager took all of our money, stole all of our, let's say it as it is, stole all of our money, and declared himself bankrupt, and so escaped the consequences of his nefarious crimes. So, you know, as a result of that, we then had an investigation. We hired forensic accountants to reconstruct our accounts to find out what he'd actually done. And one of the ways he'd managed to loot the accounts was he'd come in to our rehearsal studio on a Friday afternoon and get us to sign blank checks. We were young, we were kids, you know. Even then, I thought, well, that's a bit off. Is that really how things work in the music industry? But anyway, when we got the checks back from the bank, a load of them said pay cash £5,000 and then had my signature on the bottom. And I resolved I was never ever going to get myself in that position again. So I started finding out how the music industry worked, and started turning up to the rather boring meetings with the accountant and the lawyers that I'd run a mile rather than turn up to, you know, and made it my business to figure out how the industry worked.
Now, in the height of your success, were you self-managing the band?
No, we've never self-managed. No.
Okay. But you at least knew how it worked. So when you did have a manager, like, you know, you knew the ins and outs.
Yeah, I certainly did. I made it my business to do it. And so by and large, to this day, nobody will sign in the band or sign a contract for Blur unless it's got my signature on, because then they know I've read it.
Well, the drummers are always the smartest in the band, right?
I don't know. We got some pretty smart people in my band. Not sure I'm in the top three.
Wow. And and you also ventured into law. I mean, right? I mean, what you know, again, what I really like about everything that you've done, you know, your very colorful background is they're all different too. I mean, music, politics, law. I mean, you know, it's not really cohesive, which I love. So how did you end up getting into law?
I started helping out a criminal defence firm in the East End of London, by a weird sequence of coincidences. It was suggested that I was looking for something to do really, and it was suggested by a lawyer friend of mine that I go and help out at this firm run by a friend of his. They'd been to law school together, and they had a big case coming up, and they thought it might the case may turn on some electronic evidence that had just been served, which they didn't understand. So I volunteered my services, and I took this evidence, big pile of A2 pieces of paper about that big. I took that on and made sense of it, and explained to the partners running the case what it all meant and what the prosecution were going to try and suggest by it. So as a result of that, they offered me a job, and I started working there one day a week, and then I started working there full time. Really, somebody left, and I kind of segued into their position, and absolutely loved it. So that after working there for about a year, I decided I'd better train as a lawyer myself. So I went back to law school. I went back to school, and then qualified as a solicitor, which is there are two kinds of lawyers here: the ones that prepare the cases and the ones that present the cases in court, I suppose, is the
Sure.
rough division. Well, I qualified to do both, but anyway, I qualified as a solicitor and practiced for a number of years doing that, and it was great. Insanely stressful, it has to be said. And after a few years of practice, the band got back together, and so I carried on doing the two together for a while. But I got burned out really, so I had to choose one or the other. And of course, very few times when you're a lawyer do kind of girls throw their knickers at you. Generally, it's only when you're on stage with Blur does that happen. So it was a fairly easy choice.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, now this is kind of crazy. I mean, I'm not sure if you were prepared for this, but in July, you are playing Wembley Stadium,
Yeah.
and you sold out like in minutes, and you added a second date. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, the idea had been floated quite a few years ago, as would it be something we would be interested in doing? And we all said, sure, why not? And then one reason or another, the big reason, of course, being the pandemic, it just looked like it was, it just kind of receded back into the background again as, one of those nice ideas, but never mind. And then last year, the start of the year, we were contacted again saying, "Well, this might be possible. Would you be interested?" And we said, "Yeah, let us know." And then it was this kind of off on: is it happening? Is it not happening? And just when I was convinced it wasn't, that was it, and it actually wasn't going to happen, suddenly I got a phone call saying, "It's happening! It's happening!" And the tickets have to go on sale on Friday. And we better get a bill together and put a tour around it and all this kind of stuff. So there were some hoops to jump through, but we jumped through them all, and suddenly the gig was happening, just as well, really, because the some of the big newspapers in the UK had caught wind of this, about 5 years after the idea was first floated. But anyway, they had finally caught wind of it, and that was just published a kind of big expose. Blur are set to play Wembley just at the time when we weren't, just at the time when we'd all decided actually it's not happening. So anyway, we'll move on. So it was like, oh God, that's a bit embarrassing. But yes, it did suddenly happen, and then it sold out within a very, very short period of time. And then that's on the Saturday. The gig was on the Saturday, and then suddenly the gig that was happening on the Sunday was a sort of charity bash that the FA were putting on. That got cancelled, so Sunday was free. So then we got an even more bizarre phone call saying, "Oh, there's now a space on the Sunday as well. Do you want to play a second night?" I mean, crazy. That was very exciting.
I mean, so you're going to be playing in front of hundreds of thousands of people in the course of a weekend.
Yeah, it's actually 70,000 seats when you're putting on a rock show. So yeah, 150,000 possibly. I know, it's
Wow,
crazy.
that is crazy. So, well, I mean, so basically, and this is going to be blurred. I mean, I mean, let me ask you this: like, what do you think connected the band to like the culture over the course of how many years did you come out? I mean, you've been in the band for at least 20 years, right?
35 years roughly, yeah.
35.
Yeah.
So what do you think that the band offered where you could do this 30 years later? Was it your authenticity? Was it the fact that you just wrote great songs? You didn't care about trends? Like, what do you think that maybe it's not one ingredient, but what do you think it is?
I think fundamentally it is about songs. The songs are good. And that, in my experience, if you get the songs right, everything else falls quite naturally into place. Second, I think that we tried not to do the same thing twice. So we tried not to write the same song twice, tried not to make the same album twice. Constantly evolved, constantly looking forward, not looking back. So people just didn't just get bored of the thing. People, there's some bands find a winning formula and they bash away at it for the rest of their career, and good luck to them. But we've always kicked against that, tried to, I'm sure we'd probably be a much bigger band had we just written Park Life or Song 2 for the rest of our career, 400 variations on Song 2. We'd probably be the biggest band in the universe. But
Right. Yeah, you
so it's
would.
probably self-defeating that we've been like that. But it has given us quite a privileged position, a career where we're pretty much free to do what we want. The record companies sits back very happy to take whatever album we make and run with it. People trust us because we've released some good songs to not mess them about, and promote things properly, and play shows that people want to go to and that kind of thing. So we're in a very, I couldn't really be in a better position, I don't think, having after 35 years. We're not the biggest band in the world, but we're the freest, I think.
That's great. That's the biggest band with the freest, and that's where you want to be, right? If you don't have the independence and that creative independence, I mean, is it even really worth it? So most importantly, you have, a new album coming out January 20th. Um, this is the first time you stepped up to the microphone as a singer. I mean, you being a drummer. So now, what inspired you? And by the way, it's called Radio Songs. So what inspired you, to make this new album?
Well, I've always been a songwriter. That's been something I've done ever since I was a kid. But I think two things. The stars aligned in two ways to bring this album about. The first was I got the confidence to do it because the last kind of 7 or 8 years I've been working as a film composer and a TV score composer, and I've been successful at that. My scores have done well. I've scored some hit shows and hit films, and that gave me a lot of confidence, and it gave me a recording studio full of equipment that I could use to do it with as well. So as well as that, the confidence, I also had the space. The pandemic was an absolutely appalling experience from head to toe, but what it did give me was 2 lockdowns, the first of which I was still making film music, but the second of which the film industry had ground to a halt and I had nothing to do. And I was just looking ahead, the weeks, potentially months of lockdown, wondering how I was going to fill my time. And the producer, Leo Abrahams, and I decided to work together at some point. And we decided that was the point. And we thought we would at least do some preparatory work on my album during that lockdown, in the hope that when the lockdown finished, we could get together and make the record. As luck would have it, 6 weeks later, the album was finished, and that, working separately in our own studios turned out to be a very efficient way of working. So what I missed out on was the ability to, bounce ideas off somebody in the same room. So that's, I think, quite important. I wouldn't like to miss out on that permanently, but did mean 2 people working in 2 studios could work twice as quickly.
Now, do you plan to now this new album, do you plan to do like a promo run, or how do you plan to roll this out?
Yeah, I was going to spend the summer doing festivals, but of course I'm spending the summer doing festivals with another project now. So hopefully I've got a show on Friday in East London for the release of the album. Hopefully I'll manage to slot a couple of festival appearances in over this summer. But I guess now the main promo is going to go to next year. I'm going to try and write and record another album this year, release it in the spring of next year, and then do as many shows as I humanly can over the course of next year, because that's one of the points of the album, is that I want to be able to play live when I choose to, not just when 3 other people choose to.
Now, when you say play shows, do you mean just like clubs and venues, those types of shows?
Festivals certainly, and then whatever else I can get. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a difficult time for new projects at the moment. The festivals and the big gigs are doing quite well. As Blur has shown, if you've got 2 hours of greatest hits and there's a public appetite, you can play the big places. But for many newer projects and smaller acts are finding it quite difficult in the UK. Brexit hasn't been kind to the music industry, and whereas it used to be easy to tour Europe, it's now very difficult. So many UK acts are finding they're restricted really to playing in the UK. A lot of the live scene here has gone under during the pandemic. They just couldn't survive. So it's quite a difficult time. So we should just have to see what we can do. But the festival scene is thriving in Europe at the moment. So I definitely want to play some festival shows and see how widely I can take the project out, really.
Great. Well, Dave, I mean, again, thanks for coming on. Again, January 20th, Radio Songs, new album. Can't wait to stream it. Of course, it's going to be on Spotify, right?
Of course,
Of course.
there's no they've cornered the market. You have no choice.
What else would it be? But again, Dave, thanks for coming on. And like I said, I love chatting, love your interesting background, and I can't wait to hear your new music.
Great. Cheers, Dave.
Cheers, Dave. Have a great day.
You too. Take care. Bye.